So during COVID, as an example, we saw an explosion of cases of Tourette's. And it turned out this was a copying phenomenon from watching TikTok videos of somebody who had Tourette's. It briefly was called TikTok tics. Now, I'd like just to begin with a few questions to people, a show of hands if I can. So who has checked their phone before breakfast? Yeah. And who's lain awake at night, replaying a conversation in their head, unable to sleep? And who spent the entire day at their desk, not moved a muscle, and still felt absolutely exhausted? Yeah. These are universal feelings, and we ask, what's wrong with me? Well, today I'm going to give you the evolutionary neuroscience answer to that. Nothing. Nothing is wrong with you. What's wrong is the mismatch between our brains in this modern world around us. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in an age of paradox. We can fly to the moon, we've got amazing riches, fantastic technology, but there's a pervasive sense of melancholy, anxiety, and stress. And that's because our brains are being pushed outside of their optimal operating zone by the modern world. And it's something I see every day in clinic. Take Jane, a 33-year-old call center worker who thought she was losing her mind. She'd gotten a PIN and had forgotten where she'd parked a car in the car park. Yeah, we all probably do that. But she was getting strange rhythmic jerks as well and thought she had early onset dementia. Evolutionary neuroscience can explain her problems, but also how to make things better, which I'll come back to later. But first of all, we need to appreciate just how old the brain is. You can think of it like a tree being laid out and honed over hundreds of millions of years, gradually elaborated. So it's not like software where you can say, we've made a mistake, we'll accept it as a tech debt, and we'll wipe the slate clean and start again. You're stuck with the legacy things. And half of us in the audience have got a good example of the path dependency of development. The males with the breasts and our nipples, which are completely useless, but they're just a reflection of our evolutionary path. And if you think of the evolutionary laying out of our brain as a 1 kilometer walk, sapiens corresponds to the last 60 centimeters. And the digital revolution, just a hair's breadth at the very end. And all of the basic functions which control our emotions and our well-being sit in that trunk. I'm going to show you one of those now, and its technical term is oscitation. But you all know it by its common name, yawning. And when you hear that, and when you see that, you get the urge to do it yourself. You just can't help it. And it's a very powerful example of a core survival mechanism that we all have. And it plays out in us every day, whether we realize it or not. Whether it's the mundane as we walk along in step with whoever's walking with us, indeed even our dog, or in some neurology phenomenon. So during COVID, as an example, we saw an explosion of cases of Tourette's. And it turned out this was a copying phenomenon from watching TikTok videos of somebody who had Tourette's. It briefly was called TikTok tics. But similar mechanism is also at play with many other phenomena which affect us. Explains a lot of obesity, alcoholism, even a lot of crime. And we can think of it like an infectious disease, modelled with the R number, that concept of spread which became familiar to us during COVID. And a positive R number is good if it's around exercise, not if it's around alcoholism or viral infection. Now, I've got some bad news for you. Evolution is not interested per se in our happiness. Its only interest is whether our genes get passed on. And in service of that goal, it has cooked up a variety of tools. Pain, anxiety, yes, happiness, but also sadness. And it probably seems bizarre that these could be useful, but in the right context, they are. Take pain as an example. There are rare patients with a genetic problem, which means that they can't perceive pain. It can also happen from leprosy and syphilis. And these patients die prematurely because they can't avoid injury. Now, just because in context it's useful does not mean that I don't want a general anaesthetic when I'm under the knife. Or take anxiety. I've got occasional patients I wish were more anxious to motivate them to stay out of trouble. So in the right situation, it is really useful. And you can think of anxiety as like our brain's smoke alarm. And with a smoke alarm, we accept that it will go off with burning toast to guarantee that it will go off with a fire. And similarly, we've got to run from that predator, even though it may be a false alarm in terms of the rustle in the bushes. But in ancient times, the threats were more predictable. They'd play out quickly, and we'd learn if it was just a squirrel, and we'd calibrate our anxiety response. Now contrast that with the modern threats which make us anxious. The ever-changing, breaking news stories, the faceless bureaucracies, the complex relationships, and then we've got our wonderful frontal lobes that can concoct up these complex threats and hold them in our mind in the long term. Understanding this helps us calibrate it. But I want to take us a step back to the raison d'etre for having a brain. And that comes down to the difference between a plant and an animal. And it's not photosynthesis. We all make vitamin D from our skin using ultraviolet light. Now, the difference is that animals move, as in change location. And so the core goal of our brain is to reward us in goal pursuit, in moving actively towards a goal, and then disengaging us if the expected reward is less than the expended energy. Dopamine is the fuel of goal pursuit. Keyword there is pursuit. Nature never envisaged us just passively receiving goals, being teleported to the destination. So if we just receive things, we don't get to experience the maximal reward that is possible. Now, Pavlov's dogs, if they're just fed sausages, sure, they will salivate, but they go stir crazy if they were stuck in cages. And it's the same for us. But as I said, we've also got to sometimes shift goals, disengage if the reward isn't sufficient. Imagine a deer. It's really hungry in winter, but it knows of some food a couple of valleys away. It sets off. But the going is tougher than it expected. The ground perhaps is really marshy. The weather closes in, and that he is a potential predator. His brain may make the calculation, withdraw, go back to base. And the associated emotion which induces that goal disengagement is melancholy. Now contrast the goals of ancient times for which our brains were honed, which were more physical. They happened quicker, and there was reliable feedback, with those of modern times, which are complex, abstract, play out over years, perhaps decades, and we have long periods where we feel we're failing or get no feedback at all. But society locks us on to continuing with this goal pursuit, so we've got the accelerator and the brake locked on together with the associated melancholy. So how does this play out in real time? So imagine somebody like Andrew, I think that's what we've called him, his blood pressure traced there, he's pursuing a goal, comes across an obstacle, the brain squirts a bit of cortisol or stress hormone out, a bit of adrenaline to get over the obstacle, and then those chemicals drop back down, blood pressure drops again. But if it's really tough going, there'll be goal disengagement. Contrast that to Fiona sitting at her desk, where the constant threat is from emails, but she's still responding with that physical response system, not disengaging, so constant stress. But perhaps the most fundamental problem and goal that we have as primates is social. Because in ancient times, to be excluded from the group meant death. So much of what we do is about trying to elicit signals that we belong and that we're safe. And the next video is a wonderful example of the goal pursuit, obstacle, then the frustration playing out in real time.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay.
The same thing happens in adults every day, like the celebrity who has everything throwing a tantrum when he's overlooked for a place in the House of Lords, and you'll recognise it in your own lives as well. So validation, that sense of belonging, is so critical that we are accepted by the group, but also where we sit within the group, so the relative position and status. And if you think how that would have played out previously, we would have all been able to contribute fairly equally. Okay, you might have been a bit of a faster runner, but not a lot of difference. Whereas in modern life, we have status arms races, comparison with millions, runaway feedback loops, but still the same processes going on in our brain. So, ladies and gentlemen, the fundamental reason for so many of our problems in modern life is that our brains are perceiving a failure in our goal pursuit system. But conversely, we've got many societal structures that make us more passive than is good for us. And the key message from today is that although it's not your fault, you're not helpless. By understanding what is going on in our brains, you can start to change things and make things better. So what of Jane, our call centre rep, whose goals of promotion, or at least thankful customers, were replaced by flashing red lights on a computer screen from long customer wait times, and then abuse from customers who knew that they'd get no comeback. And then a 6-year-old child meant that she had no time for anything social. So she also then had problems with being prescribed an antidepressant, smoking, and was getting all of these twitches. And she unravelled that by moving to an admittedly lower paid job, but closer to home to give her enough time to join a running group. So she'd realigned her brain. And we can all do the same. Achievable goals, physical, social is so important, not LinkedIn numbers, but real meaningful relationships with enduring friendships. And when we feel there's something not right, don't ask, what's wrong with me? Ask, what is my brain trying to tell me? Because, ladies and gentlemen, we were shaped for persistence, not happiness. And persistence towards the right goal with the right feedback may be as close to happiness as our brains were ever designed to get. Thank you.
really fascinating, and thank you so much for the talk. I don't know about the rest of the audience, but I found the video clip of the woman going from, if you will, normal to this kind of blank face thing to be actually kind of upsetting. And I felt really bad for the baby as well. This is quite cruel. And I thought as well as that, like, there must be a lot of people that I've been accused in earlier lives of having something like, I'm making up this phrase, resting asshole face, where you look very blankly at someone without intending to, passively throw bad vibes at them, but just whatever, just having a shark-like expressionless face. And it just seems like actually something like something to sort of actively monitor against if for people that are trying to actually get along well with people.
Yeah, and it's not just the physical interaction, but it's also the signals that we get from our goals. So the piece of paper which says that you haven't got the promotion, somebody else is being paid more than you, these are all being signaled through the same goal pursuit part of our brain.
Yeah, interesting. And but is it all on the flip side as well? Is that if you're the one with excuse the expression, resting asshole, that's one thing about trying to get rid of that. But also, is it something that you as a person need to not be oversensitized to?
Yeah. So it's then thinking, the reason I'm actually getting upset is because A, B, and C, and just knowing that allows you to uncouple.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Fantastic. So, I mean, I know your work in this space as a neurologist and neuroscientist. I mean, is there? I know that I'm sure every person is different, right? In terms of, but is there a first thing that people should do? So, I mean, I have done, not very consistently, but over the years have done a fair amount of meditation, and I can't prove it, but I do feel like it has actually helped a lot. And but I don't know if that's a part of your toolkit you recommend with your patients, or.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There are different forms of meditation, but it is part of the toolkit. I mean, some of the fundamentals are, say, achievable goals, physical, social, cognitive, really focus on the enduring relationships, make sure that the goals are achievable, and then understanding what's going on in our brain and being able to observe the processes in our brain is one of the tools of meditation.
So there's obviously a lot in this talk and many other pieces, talks like this about people, trying to help develop their brain and to be, if you will, more resistant to, if you will, all the signals that you get out there today. But is there also, I mean, people like, I know Jonathan Haidt, for example, is very big in terms of this push to get phones out of schools and out of the hands of young people. And I think increasingly, people look, social media tends to be the one that was vilified recently about, that it's engineering these things to effectively play. They know the brain chemistry, and they're aggressively manipulating it to their advantage, sort of thing. So there's another side of this, which is that should the state, if you will, and governments be looking to more aggressively stop, to if you will, mute or to change environments so that there's less of us having to practice mindfulness meditation to just get along through the day?
Yeah, I mean, if the role of government is to optimize the well-being of their citizens, then that is one of the things that they should be doing.
Okay, and do you see, is that something you would see in the future of the UK?
Yeah, if enough of us get the message out, if we can get the politicians to buy the book, then they will have a toolkit to make better policies.
Fantastic. Paul, thank you so much.
Thank you.